When Pinewood Mews first opened its gates to new residents, it was marketed as a quiet haven for families and retirees alike. A cluster of modern townhouse buildings stood amid manicured lawns, with a few communal lobbies leading to mailboxes and storage nooks. The development boasted wide sidewalks, pocket parks, and a small playground. Over time, couples with young children gravitated to this suburban idyll, forging friendships over backyard barbecues and potluck dinners. The residents considered their homeowners association something of a necessary formality, an organizational body that kept the landscaping tidy, scheduled garbage collection, and handled communal amenities like the multi-use clubhouse. The HOA served as the neighborhood's collective voice, ensuring that serious matters were addressed in a calm, measured way. Yet, as the population of Pinewood Mews grew, so did the complexity of its relationships. An increasing number of strollers, bikes, and wagons appeared in lobbies, entryways, and corners near the mailboxes. Parents often found it convenient to leave their strollers in a little alcove by the communal mail area, popping inside to gather their letters and packages before hauling them, along with small children, to their units. It seemed a harmless habit, but Pinewood Mews was also home to individuals with little tolerance for clutter, no matter how harmless. Among them was an influential middle-aged woman on the HOA board, a person whose desire for order bordered on obsession. Though known around the block by her real name, Dolores Marpel, residents had whispered among themselves, calling her Karen for her tendency to meddle in everyone else's business. They had begun suspecting that a storm was brewing. Little did these families know how dramatically one determined HOA board member could disrupt their daily routines, and how that conflict would eventually reshape the entire property's approach to storing strollers. Dolores Marpel, nicknamed Karen by exasperated neighbors, was in her late 40s, with neatly trimmed hair, pastel cardigans, and an ever-ready notepad. She walked through the neighborhood as though on patrol, scanning meticulously for any transgression she could note down. A single weed poking through a neighbor's driveway cracks might earn a pointed letter. A doormat too bright or patterned in a way she disliked could merit a stern phone call about conforming to community standards. Karen took particular pride in her role on the Pinewood Mews HOA board. She was neither the president nor the treasurer, but served as the enforcement liaison, a position she had lobbied into existence. The title gave her a certain satisfaction. She interpreted it as free rein to enforce every rule, old or new, with an iron fist. She considered herself the neighborhood's guardian, ready to protect the sanctity of Pinewood Mews at any cost. Although she was quick to criticize others, Karen was surprisingly sensitive to any hint of disapproval directed at her. She harbored little empathy for families juggling small children, often ignoring how challenging it was for parents to carry groceries, a baby, and a fussy toddler all at once. Her worldview revolved around keeping the shared spaces impeccably neat, sometimes to the detriment of simple human kindness. In many ways, Karen's overbearing manner was rooted in her desire for control. Perhaps her own personal life lacked the harmony she sought, or perhaps she thrived on the power trip that came from handing out citations. Whatever the cause, tension soared whenever neighbors saw Karen's silhouette approaching, a woman with a bright, forced smile that never seemed to reach her eyes. Among the younger parents, she was a looming figure. They dreaded passing her on the sidewalk, half expecting her to find fault with their children's sidewalk chalk drawings. They did their best to appease her, sometimes moving strollers and bikes out of the way, or making small talk to ease the tension. Yet, inevitably, Karen found something to complain about. And so, bit by bit, the conflict grew. Pinewood Mews contained several interconnected lobbies, small areas attached to each townhouse cluster. One of these lobbies featured a row of metal mailboxes, a bulletin board with notices, and a little nook often used by residents to hold large parcels. The space was well-lit and fairly spacious, making it a logical place to leave a stroller temporarily while picking up the mail. It was here that Karen first locked onto her new crusade. At any given time of day, one or two strollers might be parked near the edges of the corridor. Some were expensive travel systems, sleek, modern devices with collapsible frames, while others were simple umbrella strollers with scuffs. Occasionally, if the local mothers scheduled a play date, they would line up half a dozen of them, though never in a way that blocked foot traffic. Still, Karen decided that this was an intolerable eyesore. She began snapping photos as evidence, emailing them to the HOA board with subject lines like, "Documented excess stroller use in communal areas." She insisted that strollers should be stored inside individual units, or in the designated basement storage cages, which were notoriously cramped and occasionally damp. Parents, of course, objected that carrying a folded stroller up multiple flights of stairs was difficult, especially if they had groceries or multiple kids in tow. One father, Ray Sullivan, wrote a polite yet frustrated response to the HOA. "We're not leaving strollers for days on end. It's just convenient for a short period while we gather our mail or help our toddlers inside." The conversation escalated quickly. Karen insisted that strollers were tripping hazards, though no one in the building recalled an instance where a stroller had blocked anyone's path. She also threatened fines for public obstruction. Other board members attempted to moderate her stance, but Karen persisted. She believed that if enough families were forced to lug strollers into their units or hide them in musty basement corners, the problem would vanish. However, the families felt differently. Many saw Karen's demands as not only impractical, but also petty. After all, strollers in the lobby were a temporary convenience, not a permanent fixture. The conflict simmered, building into a tense standoff. Parents wanted compromise. Karen wanted obedience. The atmosphere in Pinewood Mews grew tense. Karen's earlier crusades, like scolding a neighbor for planting a non-regulation hydrangea color or scolding teenagers for leaving bikes near the courtyard, seemed mild in comparison to the stroller dispute. This time, a large portion of the community felt the sting of her interference, uniting parents and even some childless residents who believed Karen's crusade was overkill. In the weeks that followed, discreet gossip spread. People whispered about how Karen's own grown children, who rarely visited, might have influenced her attitude toward families with young kids. Others speculated that Karen just craved control, using the HOA's rules as a justification for her power plays. Many parents decided to stick to the hallway strollers out of principle. They believed that backing down would only invite more severe restrictions. Behind the scenes, heated emails bounced around between Karen and the rest of the HOA board. A few members tried to offer solutions, such as designating a corner of the lobby for short-term stroller parking. Karen, however, balked at the idea, labeling it a slippery slope to disorder. She insisted on zero tolerance, threatening to push for new bylaws that would explicitly ban strollers from every shared space except the basement storage area. Meanwhile, everyday life continued, albeit under an uncomfortable spotlight. Mothers like Fiona Hayward, who had a newborn and a toddler, found themselves the object of Karen's piercing glares whenever they were in the lobby. Fathers like Ray Sullivan tried to reason with Karen in passing, "Will only be a minute," but she would respond with clipped remarks or remind him of pending enforcement. Even neighbors without children, like retired librarian Patricia Lane, frowned at Karen's combative approach. They questioned whether her priorities genuinely served the community or just her own sense of order. Every day, as people picked up their mail, they braced for a fresh scolding from the unstoppable Karen. Tension pulsed through the corridors, poised to erupt at any moment. Despite repeated attempts by parents to compromise, Karen refused to budge. One afternoon, she decided to take matters into her own hands, an action that would escalate the conflict to unprecedented levels. She called up a local towing service, inquiring if they handled obstructions in communal areas. While the company declined to remove personal property without an official city mandate, Karen's plan was only beginning. Early the next morning, Karen printed and laminated a series of large notices. Attention, no strollers permitted in the lobby for more than 5 minutes. Violators will be fined. She taped them around the mail area, on the glass doors, even near the elevator. Parents discovered these notices with disbelief. No such bylaw existed in their official HOA documents. Who was Karen to invent rules overnight? Outrage rippled through the building. Fiona, carrying a swaddled infant, read one sign and burst into frustrated tears. She couldn't fathom how to juggle her baby and the day's mail without setting the stroller aside. When she spotted Karen in the corridor, she tried to reason with her. "Dolores, please, you have to understand how hard this is with kids." Karen's lips tightened. "The rules are the rules," she intoned, as though the posters were part of a universally accepted regulation. We need a neat and clean environment. It's not posted in the official bylaws. You're just making this up, Fiona argued, voice trembling. Karen's gaze hardened. I have authority from the board to maintain order. That last statement was only partially true. Yes, Karen was the enforcement liaison, but the board had never approved a total stroller ban. Regardless, Karen walked away, leaving Fiona and other parents exasperated. The building buzzed with talk of resistance. Some proposed collectively ignoring the new signs. Others wrote emails to the broader HOA membership. But no one guessed that Karen's next action would be so extreme and so damaging to the community's trust in her. It happened late on a Friday night, long past the usual bedtime for young children. A handful of strollers had been left in the lobby by parents who intended to move them first thing in the morning. The second-floor hallway camera recorded Karen stepping off the elevator around 11:45 p.m., carrying something large and metallic. She glanced around, making sure no one else was present, then moved to the main floor. Clink, clank. The muffled sounds of metal scraping on metal echoed in the otherwise silent corridor. Karen, under the glow of a single fluorescent light, looped a heavy-duty chain through the wheels and frames of multiple strollers, binding them into one bulky mass near the corner of the lobby. Then she snapped a padlock into place. It was as if she were corralling stray shopping carts, or so she thought. The result looked more like a bizarre installation art piece than a solution to her perceived problem. Her satisfaction evident. Karen took out her cell phone and snapped pictures of her handiwork. She planned to email them to the HOA board as proof of compliance enforcement. Then she retreated to her townhouse, confident that she had dealt a decisive blow to the so-called stroller menace. Early the next morning, parents stumbled upon the chained strollers, confusion turning quickly to alarm. Mothers and fathers stood gape-mouthed, holding toddlers or balancing diaper bags, forced to contemplate how on earth they would free their property. A father, Oliver Wong, tapped the chain with his foot, exclaiming in disbelief, "Who would do this?" Fiona, bleary-eyed from her infant's midnight feeding, recognized Karen's laminated signs pinned to one stroller handle. "Dolores," she whispered, shaking her head in fury. Calls and texts flew among neighbors. Ray Sullivan tried to find bolt cutters. Another family considered filing a police report for property theft. Tensions flared into open outrage. Even neutral residents who rarely used strollers were appalled. The entire building felt personally violated. If Karen could chain up strollers, what would she target next? Bicycles? Mobility scooters for the elderly? The sense of shock soon gave way to a resolute anger, forging a common cause among the weary parents and sympathetic bystanders. No matter their differences, they agreed. Karen had gone too far. Within hours, a meeting took shape in the small communal lounge off the lobby. Parents and neighbors gathered, some fuming, others trying to remain calm. Even individuals without children came, drawn by a sense of solidarity. They formed a loose circle, toddlers wiggling in laps, while babies dozed in car seats set on the floor. Ray Sullivan took on an informal leadership role. "We can't let this stand," he said, motioning to the photo of the chained strollers on his phone. "This is vandalism or at least some form of property tampering. She locked up our stuff without our permission." Fiona, her cheeks flushed from stress, nodded vigorously. "What if someone needed to rush their child to the doctor? If our stroller's chained up, we can't even leave quickly." Oliver chimed in, echoing the safety concerns. Patricia Lane, the retired librarian, spoke quietly from a corner seat. "I don't have children, but this sets a dangerous precedent. What's next?" She might chain together any items she deems out of place. A mother named Bianca, holding her squirming 1-year-old, suggested contacting the HOA board immediately. "We should also gather photographic proof," she said. "Show them how she's stepping beyond her authority." Heads bobbed in agreement. They decided to write a collective letter to the board, attaching pictures, citing the relevant bylaws, which did not ban strollers, and demanding an emergency meeting. Meanwhile, a local handyman volunteered his bolt cutters to free the chained strollers, returning them to their rightful owners. The parents left that informal meeting feeling a flicker of hope. For too long, Karen's intimidation tactics had cowed them into compliance. Now, she had crossed a line that united them in collective action. Children fussed and cried as the cluster dispersed. mothers and fathers pressing on with their day's tasks, uncertain but determined. For many, simply retrieving their mail had turned into a protracted battle of wills. Yet they now had a plan: stand together, present a unified front, and push back against Karen's destructive zeal. The aftermath of the chained strollers reverberated throughout Pinewood Mews. By mid-morning on Saturday, social media groups and text threads lit up with photos of the bizarre chain job. Parents recounted how they'd found their strollers locked together like misbehaving bicycles. Words like unhinged, tyrannical, and power trip circulated among the outraged commentary. Karen, either oblivious to the growing backlash or reveling in her self-appointed role, spent the weekend doubling down. She emailed the HOA board a series of bullet points titled, "Why the Lobby Stroller Ban Must Be Enforced." It included dubious claims about fire hazards and urgent aesthetic priorities. She also attached her own photos of the chained strollers, labeling them irrefutable proof of compliance action. However, the board members, some of whom had already heard from furious residents, were not impressed. Several board members emailed Karen back, citing concerns over legal liability and the possibility that she had tampered with personal property without any official directive. One board member, Angela Reyes, wrote sternly, "Dolores, you cannot unilaterally chain residents' possessions. This is not an approved enforcement measure." Another board member, Daniel Lee, called for calm, urging a more nuanced approach. Despite these admonitions, Karen appeared resolute in her stance. She kept repeating that strollers were an eyesore, a safety risk, and a threat to property values. At no point did she acknowledge that the families she was targeting had legitimate needs or that her chain lock stunt was extreme. On Sunday, the parents finalized their letter of complaint, complete with evidence and testimonials. They demanded an immediate emergency HOA session to address Karen's behavior and propose a more reasonable solution. Meanwhile, neighbors who had once quietly abided by Karen's petty rules, like specific doormats or color-coded mulch, felt emboldened to speak out. They realized that if they let her keep steamrolling others, the entire neighborhood would suffer. A sense of unity blossomed amid the collective fury, forging alliances that had never existed before. By Sunday night, the residents awaited the board's response with bated breath. Would the HOA stand behind Karen, or would they acknowledge that she'd gone too far? On Tuesday evening, the HOA board convened a rare emergency session in the Pinewood Mews community room. Unlike the usual monthly gatherings that attracted only a handful of residents, this meeting drew a large crowd. Mothers rocked babies to sleep, fathers paced with toddlers, and child-free neighbors filled folding chairs. In the back stood older residents, curious about the drama that had erupted. Karen arrived early, her notepad under her arm, hair brushed into a tight bob. She wore a severe expression, scanning the room as though expecting an outpouring of gratitude rather than ire. The board members, President Michelle Gentry, Treasurer Paul Novak, Secretary Janet Evers, along with Angela Reyes and Daniel Lee, settled behind a long folding table at the front. Michelle, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, opened the meeting. "We have gathered to address the recent incident involving strollers chained in the lobby. We appreciate everyone's patience as we seek a fair resolution." She then asked for public comments. Fiona, Ray, and Oliver rose in turn, describing how Karen's actions had disrupted their daily routines and, more importantly, infringed on their property rights. Fiona's voice trembled as she recounted how fearful she'd become of simply leaving her stroller for a short period. Ray shared a printed collage of photos showing the strollers chained together, causing gasps from those who hadn't seen the images yet. Patricia Lane then took the microphone, explaining that while she had no children, she was appalled by Karen's brazen tactics. All eyes turned to Karen. She gripped her notepad, flipping through pages of typed bullet points. "I understand that some neighbors are upset," she began in a clipped tone, "but the presence of strollers in communal areas has become a hazard. I took action to protect our community from potential lawsuits, accidents, or lowered property values." A father from the audience interjected, "That's nonsense. You nearly damaged our property, our kids' strollers. How is that protecting the community?" Applause and scattered cheers of agreement rippled through the crowd. Undeterred, Karen pressed on. "Our bylaws indicate that residents must not obstruct common passages. I was simply preventing an egregious violation. She peered at Michelle, seeking validation. But the board remained largely unsympathetic. Angela Reyes shook her head. Dolores, we've repeatedly stated that any measures must be approved by the board as a whole. You acted unilaterally. Furthermore, we have residents citing real harm, physical and emotional, from your actions. This is unacceptable. A tense silence followed. Finally, Michelle announced that the board would discuss possible solutions for stroller storage, which might include designating a portion of the lobby for short-term parking or installing a small stroller rack. She then firmly reminded Karen that no further enforcement actions would be tolerated without explicit approval. The crowd cheered. Karen, her jaw clenched, offered no apology. By the end of the session, the board agreed to review proposals for a more permanent storage solution, one that met both safety standards and parents' needs. Though the conflict was hardly resolved, many left feeling hopeful that Karen's iron grip was weakening, at least for the moment. In the days following the emergency HOA session, Pinewood Mews experienced a collective exhale. Parents once again placed strollers near the mailboxes, albeit with a watchful eye for any sign of Karen. People felt emboldened by the board's public scolding of her unilateral tactics. They began to talk openly about forming a parent committee to ensure that families' voices were heard in future HOA decisions. Karen, however, was not one to surrender easily. She had long relied on fear and intimidation to maintain her sway. Now that her authority was being openly questioned, she scrambled to regain control. During a routine board workshop, she tried to propose an amendment to the bylaws banning all personal items from the lobby at any time. The board immediately tabled her motion. At one point, Karen reached out to certain allies within the community, particularly older residents with no children, attempting to stoke fears of fire hazards or unruly children. Some listened politely, but few were swayed. The chain incident had left a bad taste in everyone's mouth, making them wary of supporting her. Indeed, the stunt had backfired spectacularly, portraying Karen as an extremist rather than a defender of order. Meanwhile, the family she had targeted forged new friendships. Children played together in the small courtyard, parents compared notes on jogging strollers, and the once disparate group found unity in standing up to Karen. As neighborly ties strengthened, Karen stood out more starkly as an antagonist, a lonely figure who seemed hell-bent on imposing her will. This shift in social dynamics troubled Karen more than she let on. Without the usual fear-driven compliance, her position on the HOA board felt precarious. Rumors swirled that she might face a formal censure or even a petition for removal if she continued her rogue enforcement. Yet her pride would not allow her to step back gracefully. Each time she passed the lobby, her gaze lingered resentfully on any strollers parked there. Behind closed doors, she vowed that if the board wouldn't fully ban strollers in the lobby, she'd find another way to eradicate what she saw as unsightly baby wagons. Her next moves would further alienate her from the very community she claimed to protect. Pressured by the outcry, the HOA board moved faster than usual to propose a formal stroller storage plan. At a subsequent open meeting, they unveiled a blueprint for a small but organized stroller parking zone within the lobby. The plan included a metal rack with individual slots where residents could secure their strollers for short periods. There would be a sign reading "Stroller Parking, Courtesy Use," and a built-in locking mechanism to deter theft. The entire area would be delineated by a painted boundary on the floor, ensuring that strollers didn't sprawl across the walkway. Reactions from the crowd were largely positive. Parents welcomed a neat, centralized option. Many had worried that banning strollers entirely would make daily life more difficult, but this solution struck a balance. It kept the lobby from looking cluttered, yet recognized the practical needs of families. Even older or child-free residents appreciated that the plan took order into account. The highlight of the proposal was the optional access code gate that would sit at the entry to the stroller parking zone. This was an enclosed but visible structure, like a short fence with a coded gate, meant to discourage unauthorized tampering. Baby's gear would be safe from meddling hands, and it offered parents peace of mind when they went upstairs to unload groceries or gather their mail. Maintenance fees would be covered by the HOA's Communal Improvement Fund, no additional charge to parents. Karen, who attended the meeting, listened with ill-disguised contempt. She objected to the cost, although the board had already confirmed sufficient budget. She complained about additional noise, but the audience pointed out that parents would quietly retrieve strollers, not host block parties in the lobby. Ultimately, Karen's protests were drowned out by the majority's approval. The board voted 4-1 in favor of moving forward with the new stroller zone. Karen was the lone dissenter. Her face flushed as she realized her attempts to escalate the conflict had spurred the very solution she detested. In the days that followed, workers installed the small fence, set up the code entry, and placed a stylish sign above it. The new arrangement looked professional, almost chic. Young parents felt a thrill of triumph. By going overboard with her chain stunt, Karen had ironically propelled the HOA to create a legitimate stroller parking solution that was more permanent, more visible, and fully authorized. From her second-floor window, Karen watched the construction of the stroller zone with a mixture of rage and resentment. All around the complex, neighbors seemed relieved. One problem solved, a sign of a functional HOA. Families began using the code gate even before the paint was fully dry, delighted to have a dedicated spot for their strollers without fear of them being chained, towed, or scolded away. Karen's meltdown was palpable. She'd spent months railing against stroller clutter, only to see the HOA not only refuse to ban strollers, but also create an official storage area. In her mind, this was a public humiliation. She had begun as the self-appointed vigilante of the lobbies, yet now the community had effectively legalized and institutionalized the very practice she wanted to extinguish. Bitterness gnawed at her. On multiple occasions, neighbors overheard her muttering sarcastic comments. "I suppose next they'll install a water park in the hallway." Or sure, let's turn the lobby into a baby amusement park. People largely ignored her or responded with polite smiles. Karen's sharp retorts only alienated her further, leaving her isolated in the place she once held a modicum of influence. Days turned into a week. The more Karen stewed, the more she convinced herself that the board's decision was a personal affront, orchestrated to undermine her. She wrote an angry letter to each board member, accusing them of negligence and ignoring true safety concerns. She threatened to contact local fire marshals or city inspectors, hoping to find code violations in the new stroller zone. But each official visit she arranged concluded that the area was safe, properly marked, and well within regulations. The tide of public opinion had turned decisively against her. Parents were openly grateful for the new zone, praising the HOA for addressing the issue fairly. Even childless residents acknowledged that the space looked tidy, no longer cluttered as in the past. Meanwhile, the question looming in everyone's mind was, what will Karen do next? If her chaining stunt was any indication, she wasn't done stirring the pot. If Karen believed she could sabotage the stroller zone by pushing for random inspections or spamming the board with complaints, she was mistaken. Each time she lodged a formal grievance, she found the board increasingly cool to her concerns. President Michelle Gentry, once mild-mannered, penned a polite but firm email instructing Karen to respect the collective decisions made by this association and avoid unilateral actions. Outside official channels, residents rallied to defend the new setup. Parents in the building organized a family day in the lobby to celebrate the newly installed stroller zone. They placed balloons near the code gate, handed out cookies, and let kids play with toy strollers, much smaller replicas of the real ones. Even those without children stopped by to enjoy the sense of community. The entire celebration sent a clear message. Pinewood Muse supported its families, and Karen's negativity could not overshadow the new arrangement. During the event, Karen was nowhere to be seen. Some said she was at home, peeking from behind the blinds, fuming at the sight of laughter and camaraderie. Others claimed she left altogether, driving around the neighborhood, hoping to find a minor bylaw violation somewhere else. If she did, no one heard about it. The sense of unity that developed around the stroller zone victory carried over to other aspects of community life. A few neighbors had an idea to create a little library near the playground. Another proposed a block party for the 4th of July. Momentum built for positive, inclusive projects that welcomed all ages. And each friendly conversation, each invitation to join a new event, further isolated Karen and her outdated, antagonistic methods. But the final chapter of Karen's meddling was still unfolding. Whispers began among residents about formally challenging her position on the board. Some believed she was too divisive, too prone to extremism, for the role of enforcement liaison. They gathered signatures quietly, uncertain whether a recall election was possible under their HOA bylaws. Meanwhile, Karen continued to seethe. Her defeat on Strollers had made her even more determined to show that she was right all along. Rumors of a potential recall vote wafted through the Pinewood Mews community. Residents grew weary of Karen's endless nitpicking and aggression. Although the HOA had 5 board members, only Karen consistently generated chaos. Michelle and others handled common tasks like scheduling landscaping or planning seasonal decorations with little controversy. Karen, by contrast, thrived on confrontation, feeding on the negative energy it sparked. For a recall to occur, the bylaws required a petition with a significant percentage of homeowners' signatures, followed by a special meeting to vote. Quietly, a handful of parents took the lead, knocking on doors, explaining to neighbors how Karen's unilateral approach harmed community relations. They pointed out that the stroller incident was just the latest in a pattern of overreaching behavior. She had scolded people over everything from holiday wreaths to playing music on their patios. Surprisingly, they found a receptive audience. Even some older residents who once tolerated Karen's meticulous policing grew concerned after she chained the strollers. It was a step too far, painting an unsettling picture of what she might do in the future if left unchecked. Karen, sensing the undercurrents, tried to rally her own supporters. She visited certain neighbors, brandishing files of violations she claimed to have documented. She framed her enforcement as a necessary crusade to keep property values high and maintain order. Yet she found few genuine allies. Some politely listened to her pleas, but many stood firm that her approach was too harsh. As the petition gained signatures, word spread that it was nearing the threshold needed to trigger a recall vote. The building buzzed with speculation. Would Karen be forced off the board? Or would she somehow maneuver her way to remain in power? Tensions grew once again. Though this time the community felt an undercurrent of hope. They had faced her intimidation before and now recognized that collective resolve could steer the neighborhood away from her dictatorial tendencies. Eventually, the petitions reached the required number of signatures, prompting the HOA leadership to schedule a special recall meeting. This took place on a warm summer evening in the same community room where Karen had faced widespread condemnation for chaining strollers. Attendance was once again high, though the mood was far different from the earlier confrontation. Now, the sense of finality hung in the air. Karen arrived clutching a binder of documents and letters. She took a seat near the front, eyes flicking from face to face as if gauging how many in attendance might still be on her side. President Michelle Gentry explained the recall process. Each side would have a chance to speak, then a simple majority vote by the homeowners present, in person or by proxy, would determine Karen's fate on the board. She was given the floor first. In a halting yet strangely forceful tone, Karen insisted that her strict enforcement had protected Pinewood Mews from chaos, that her unyielding approach had shielded property values. She disparaged the new stroller zone as a misguided compromise, though she offered no apology for her chain stunt. Instead, she implied that parents were overreacting, calling them emotional and unwilling to follow basic rules. Her words did little to sway the crowd. If anything, they underscored her lack of remorse. Next, a few residents spoke, some parents, but also older homeowners and a young couple expecting their first child. They detailed how Karen's approach had fostered fear and resentment rather than harmony. They commended the board's willingness to find middle ground on issues like the stroller zone. They contended that, for the good of the community, Karen should no longer wield authority. After the statements, the vote began. Homeowners lined up to fill out their secret ballots. Karen, watching the steady procession, pressed her lips into a thin line. Within 30 minutes, the results were tallied. An overwhelming majority favored removing her from the board. A hush fell as Michelle announced the result. Karen was officially recalled, effective immediately. Gasps of relief and a few quiet cheers rippled across the room. Karen stood, face flushed, binder clutched protectively against her chest. Without a word, she strode out the door. In the following weeks, the drama settled. Freed from Karen's overbearing presence on the board, Pinewood, Muse found renewed energy in collaborative projects. The stroller zone continued to operate smoothly, with parents abiding by the short-term usage guidelines. No one chained any strollers. In fact, the once messy corner seemed tidier than ever. Families, newly confident in their rights, left strollers for short intervals to pick up mail, run upstairs, or chat briefly with neighbors in the corridor. Karen remained a resident. Of course, no recall could force her to move. But her influence waned, and she found that her neighbors treated her with polite but distant courtesy. Over time, even her once critical eye seemed to soften. Perhaps losing her board position convinced her that unrelenting aggression brought only isolation. The final irony was this. By attempting to clamp down on strollers, Karen had motivated the community to organize an official, well-designed stroller station, making them even more visible and unstoppable. The chain lock that once symbolized her domination had become a symbol of her downfall and the neighborhood's collective resilience. In the end, Pinewood Muse carried on, and the family she had antagonized did so with a bigger sense of unity than ever before. Neighbors would long remember the day Karen chained their strollers together in the lobby, snarling, "No space for baby wagons." Yet it was precisely that extreme act which sparked a new sense of purpose and solidarity. The parents' victory in establishing a code-gated stroller zone would forever stand as a testament to what a community could accomplish when faced with an overzealous, self-styled enforcer, and how an attempt to tighten control can sometimes, in the end, bring about the exact opposite result.